Hello friends, so today's video is going to be my full February wrap-up. I did do a February new releases wrap-up, and for those of you who have already watched that and don't really need to see me talk about those books again, I'll have a timestamp so you can skip over the first part of the video because I am going to mention those, and if you're somebody who hasn't heard me talk about these yet, I'll have that video linked. I will go more in depth in that video than in this one, but I still wanted to mention them really quick in case you don't want to have to jump to another video. So first up, and one of my favorite reads actually of February, was Justice of Kings. The synopsis definitely makes it seem like you're going to be following the perspective of this character here, Sir Conrad von Valt. And this character is judge, jury, and executioner and detective all in one. He is a person that holds a great deal of power, but you're not actually following his perspective. You are following the perspective of his protege, Helena or Helena. I'm forgetting exactly the pronunciation, but you're following her, and she is the person who helps him with researching things. She's the person who writes all the notes down whenever he is discussing a case with somebody. She's just basically almost like his assistant. And it is one of those situations where Helena is telling you about the story from an older age, but at the time of this book, she's only 19, and I mentioned this in my other video as well. I really liked this book, but she can be so frustrating and so ridiculous, and all the negative aspects of our youth that are embarrassing and frustrating and are over-the-top emotions and reactions. She has all of that, but because she's telling you the story from an older age, she definitely has reflected, and she'll often think back on, well, at the time I felt this way, but looking back on it, I think that the reason that they were talking to me like this was because of this, or I actually think I'm really grateful that they made this decision even though I was upset at the time. So you get those things and you see the wisdom there, but then you also see at times where she's kind of making fun of herself for being so ridiculous. So there is some aspects of it being kind of funny. However, it's not, I would say, a funny book or a light book. It gets very serious toward the end. It's very violent, and it's a book about principles. There's a lot of discussion, sort of philosophical conversations about justice. There's also literally a courtroom scene in the story, which I thought was very engaging. If you're a plot-driven reader, this book might frustrate you because I don't think the plot is particularly clear. It's not like we have an objective and we're just going toward that the whole time. It's a little bit back and forth. We're kind of just following these characters for a while. So I definitely think it's a book that sets a foundation, and I can see there being a greater plot perhaps in the rest of what I believe is going to be a trilogy. However, it might be frustrating if you're a plot-driven reader. Beyond that, though, I thought this was such a fantastic reading experience, and I can't wait for when we do eventually get the sequel. The other two new releases I picked up would be Castles in Their Bones and The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea. This particular one is a retelling, and it follows a girl who sacrifices herself to this sea god in order to try and hopefully take the place of somebody else who is supposed to be sacrificed, as well as squash the anger of the sea god and make life better for everyone else. And in sacrificing herself, she doesn't really know what that means. When she jumps into the sea, what's going to happen to her? And that's what you follow. And there's a lot of themes, I think, of family. There's sort of an aspect of found family, but also connection to yourself and those around you, the people in your life. I do wish it was a little longer. It is a short book. It is a standalone. I wish we'd gotten more, but I do hope that this author not only writes more, but I hope they write more retellings in this sort of vibe, but I think I want a little bit more because I really like their writing, and I actually really liked the main character as well. Castles in Their Bones I've mentioned a few times at this point. This is a particular story that follows three sisters. They are triplets. From the time they are born, the Empress, who is their mother, has raised them to manipulate, to deceive, to seduce, to do whatever they have to do to try and trick the people who they are marrying, and they're all going to different kingdoms. They're being married off to different places. Their goal is to try and actually get those kingdoms weakened and get them to go to war with one another so that their mother can eventually sweep in, take over those places, and become the empress of all of those areas. So it's very much about politicking, scheming, trying to get your way, trying to outmaneuver other people. I love stories like that. I find them so incredibly entertaining. There's also an aspect, I would say, in this where, because certain things to me felt very obvious, that meant when something else happened later, I wasn't expecting it, which I quite liked. And I am really excited for the sequel because there's something that happens and I'm like, did that happen? Is that what we did there? I don't actually know. I think it is, but I'm not sure. Such a fun time. If you're looking for a great, fun, scheming type of book, this one is a go-to. Jumping now into some books that are not new releases that I got around to, and the reason that this video for February is coming so late is because I finally picked up the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin. I know. So many of you have been waiting for me to pick this up. Last year I did a You Choose My TBR. I was gonna give books another chance. I picked this one up years ago. I read hardly any of it. In the second person point of view, I was like, this is strange. And then I immediately stopped, and I'm so embarrassed now because it wasn't that weird. It wasn't strange at all, honestly. It wasn't. So I'm embarrassed. And if you're somebody who's like me and you're like, I'm basic, because that's what I always say about myself. If you're like that and that's what's holding you back, don't let that be the thing that holds you back. I promise it's not a big deal. The reason, though, that it took me so long to do this video is because this was on my February TBR. And then my husband, Sean, he's been getting back into fantasy, partially because of this. And he saw it was on my TBR, and he's like, I kind of want to check that book out. And I was like, oh yeah? Because I was excited because I want him to read some more fantasy books, you know? He's a big reader, and he reads a huge mix of things. I'll have another video that I did with him recently linked. But either way, he's like, yeah, I want to read it. Because Sean's job does not revolve around reading books, and he only really reads as something to be in his spare time, he doesn't have as much time to read as I do. So I was like, okay, well, just read that when you can, and then I'll get around to it when you're done. So, because I read it in a day. Because I just knew, you know, I was going to pick it up and read it quick, and he might need more time. He ended up reading it and then already read the second one, and then now he's in the third one. So he really liked it, and he'll actually get to tell you more of his thoughts about it soon. I think that he actually enjoyed it more than I did. Sean is a very big thematic reader, and I think that is the thing that shines in the 5th season. The themes in this are so much about things that parallel to our own world, the way that certain people are treated, the way that certain people are seen as other, are seen as different, and the way that having somebody be seen as different or other, how it leads to basically nothing but negative things. In this world, we have catastrophic events that lead to different seasons, the 5th season being a world-ending type of catastrophic event. And the beginning of the story, we see that there is something that has happened, and now it seems we're coming upon what is basically the end of the world. And the reason I say basically is because mankind can persevere and can push through it, but a lot of people are going to die, a lot of the land is going to change, and there's only so many people that are going to survive. So right from the beginning of the story, we have some pretty intense stakes, and we follow 3 different perspectives. One is a child, one is a young woman, and then one is a middle-aged woman. And not only is the world facing some difficult things, but we see each of these individual characters having their own obstacles that they have to overcome. Like I said, I think the themes were incredible. For the world-building aspects, I think that N.K. Jemisin purposefully withholds certain information from you, and I am curious to see if we get some of those things in the sequels. Sean has told me thus far, the second one at least just kind of introduces more things, and you don't necessarily get a lot of answers. And that's not to say that I need a hard magic system. I need everything explained to me, holding my hand. I'm not saying that. It's just a lot of things are laid out, and then I don't quite know how those things work. How do those things fit into the society? Because clearly a lot of things are thought through. And like I said, you see these themes coming through in how people interact with each other. But when it comes to the world itself, there's so much to do with the magic and with the specific magic users, which are called origins, who have the ability to sense things going on in the earth and control them. Not everybody has mastered those abilities. These people can be seen as very dangerous, and these are the individuals that are seen as other. So there's so much to how society treats them, how society is structured, how society structures itself around these natural disasters. There's so many aspects, but because the world building is there's so much to the world that I almost felt like the book was, I think I wanted it to be longer. And I don't say that as just a blanket statement for every single book. I don't want every book out there to be longer. I think some books, especially in fantasy, can be cut down. But I wanted to know more about the world. So that's not really what we got always in this first book. And the perspectives are interesting because you I think you see these characters just trying to get through things. And when I'm always talking about, I love just sitting with characters and watching them think and feel, they don't have the time to do that. They just have to push on. And I understand why they have to do that. And it makes for a very engaging read. But I still I'm wanting more of everything, I guess, is what I have to say. So I am going to pick up the second one. And I know the second one's shorter. And I know, as the way my husband puts it, they basically go on like a side quest. And then we'll see what happens in the third one. There's just so many things left that haven't been patched up yet. The fifth season, if its plot seemed bleak, the next book just kind of makes it seem like nothing. And that would be Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. This is one of my favorite things that I read this month. I feel weird saying I enjoyed it so much. I absolutely loved it. That does not seem like the right way to describe this book. I loved the author's writing. I loved all the philosophical musings in this story. It's a dystopian book that takes place pretty close to right now. The main character, she lives in a neighborhood with her family and a lot of other people that she knows, and it is sort of walled in because they're trying to protect themselves from a lot of people on the outside who want to come in and steal from them. They want to burn, they want to do a lot of other things that are very violent and things I don't even want to give details to because they're horrific. And that's the thing, is this book is so incredibly bleak. It's just one terrible thing after the next. If you've read The Underground Railroad, I think that's a particular book that also has horrific things in it, but the author does not make it entertaining. They don't go over the top with the descriptions. They don't sensationalize those things. It's just kind of a fact of life. And I think that's true of this one as well. It's not that it sugarcoats it. It's not that it makes the characters turn their eyes away so that we don't have to look. We see all of the terrible things that are occurring, and we see how these terrible things are occurring because of where society is. Class differences, things that are going on with the literal land itself, water shortages, the way that companies are taking almost people into slavery through debt. You're seeing all these things occurring that's just leading to people starting to turn against each other, and in the most horrific of ways. And so this character, her dream is to go further north where she's heard things are better, and also to spread what she believes is the actual truth about God. It is a very, very difficult book. If you're the kind of person who tries to shy away from grimdark type of books when you're going through tough times, don't pick this one up if you are going through it right now and you're that kind of a reader. However, I know some people are like, I love reading books that are incredibly dark and bleak and tragic because it makes me feel like, my life's not that bad. So if you're that kind of person, check this one out. And also, if you just want to see incredible writing and somebody who had, for the time that this was written, I'm not the kind of person that looks at this and we're like, oh my gosh, this is our future in 2 years, because it does take place starting in 2024. While I don't feel that, I do feel like she had foresight when it came to certain things, and also she's just an incredible writer, an incredible mind, and the way it's written is kind of almost journal entries. So you see the date, and then you see the character discussing what happened then, and then you get the next date. I just thought it was fantastic. I don't know that I can say too much more because I don't want to reveal too much of what goes on, but like I said, you're gonna have to be in the right headspace, I think, for this one, because it is the bleakest thing I think I've ever picked up. Sticking with the bleak train, I also happen to have read Sorrowland by River Solomon, another phenomenal writer. The craft of writing, I think that River Solomon is masterful at that, and I think that shines in this particular story. This one too is not so much dystopian the way that we see in Parable of the Sower, but it does follow a fictional thing within our own society. So you see this girl who has been raised within what is sadly basically a cult. She was married at a very young age, and she ended up becoming pregnant and having children, but she was determined to get away from these people and this place where she has grown up. And so while she is pregnant, she runs away. and she does end up having her children out in the middle of the wilderness, and she's trying to survive. She's trying to raise them. She's trying to keep them alive. And then you just kind of see her navigate motherhood. You see her trying to live within the forest. And the forest is definitely very representative of a lot of different things involving freedom, but also I think the loss of community. And there's just so much to it that the author tackles a lot within this one book. Identity, a child's ability to choose things for themselves, and also you see a lot to do with how certain groups of people are treated. And again, another thing that's incredibly bleak. There's also a lot of pulls from our own society, our own history, that I think are, for me, they were very clear in the story. I think the author does kind of, in case you miss some of these themes, kind of lets you know later on in the book, you know how these things have happened. And I'm trying to be purposefully vague because I don't want to ruin the reading experience for other people. I want them to be able to read it and also interpret it however they do. The fantasy elements in the story become a lot more present in the latter half. For me personally, I think sometimes I struggle with when a story is taking place within our own world and then really strong fantastical elements come through. I think something like Parable of the Sower is very clearly, it's dystopian, but there's not really magic. Our character in Parable of the Sower has something called hyperempathy, where she can be injured or feel injured when she sees other people injured, and that I would say is about as far as the magic goes. There's also something called pyro, which is this drug that makes people kind of addicted to watching things burn. But that's about it. Otherwise, it's hardly really fantasy beyond just it's dystopian. And then you have something like The Fifth Season that is fantasy, but it has a lot of themes that are relating to our own world. And then in this particular book, it was kind of a blend, which I think is going to work for a lot of people. It's our own world. It's pulling from a lot of our own history, and it's a lot of themes that a lot of us, there's so many different things that I think you can latch on to, connect with, or gain more empathy through reading the story. But it is kind of a hybrid of setting that is very much our world, and then later here's this interesting fantasy element. And the fantasy, when it does start to come through, it's really interesting, it's really different, and sometimes in the story it's hard for you to differentiate what's actually happening and what isn't. And so it also gets not quite to be magical realism, but it gets almost blurry. For my personal taste, I kind of wish it had either leaned really into the fantasy or had leaned really into just our own world. It is a standalone, it's not very long, and I feel bad to repeat this again, but I almost wish it had been longer or been multiple books. But hopefully a lot of you end up thinking the opposite and enjoy it for just what it is and gain so much from it. The next book would be Trailblazer. This is one that I substituted in, and it ended up being my nonfiction pick. It says here at the top, a memoir by the first Black woman reporter at the Washington Post. So she was a reporter at a time in America where we still had segregation. We were kind of right there on the civil rights movement. She actually grew up in the Deep South when segregation was very much enforced there, and you just see her push through absolutely terrible circumstances, and I just feel like she has so much dignity and grace and intelligence, and I think she's a very inspiring person, and I just wanted to read her story. The book, in my opinion, is kind of structured in 3 informal parts. So the first part is sort of setting up what America was like at that time. She goes through different things that were occurring as far as Black people for the first time being able to go into what were previously white-only schools, what it was like trying to cover those stories, the things that she as a Black woman had to do in order to cover those stories, or things that other reporters had to do to cover those stories. One example she gives of when some children were going to go into what was previously a white-only school, that one of the reporters who went there, other parents who were protesting this thought that the reporter was the parent of one of the Black children, and then beat that person, and then that person died years later from complications from that beating. So she's laying the foundation for, this is where we were at the time that I entered the Washington Post. And she also shows you the kinds of things that she had to deal with as racism was present even in her workplace, through her coworkers, just also so many obstacles and barriers that she had to overcome. So we see that first initial part of the book. Then in the middle section, I would say she goes through her life. She somewhat starts with where she grew up, what her upbringing was like, her parents, her siblings, what she was like at a young age, and then she kind of takes you through a lot of her life. And then the last part, I would say, is her reflecting back, looking toward the future, looking at the things she's most proud of, looking at the way society is now, and sort of kind of commenting with the wisdom she's gained on certain things now. And so if you go into this expecting it to be chronological, here's when I was a kid, here's what it was like Washington Post, here's right now, then that's not really what you're going to get. It is going to bounce around a little bit, which the reason I bring this up is I've seen some reviews that were kind of confused by this or thought it was strange. I wasn't, because I thought that it was kind of what I've come to expect from a lot of nonfiction. I think a lot of times it's broken up into different themes in a sense. So now you have that heads up. You are going to get things back and forth a little bit here and there, but I feel like this was just an absolutely phenomenal read. Highly recommend. It's one of those books that I just feel like so many people can gain so much from reading about her. Last, we have Bringing Down the Duke. This is a romance historical fiction story. I thought it was very perfect for the month of February because of Valentine's Day, so I went ahead and picked this one up. And given that so much of what I read was sad in the month of February, this was definitely a fluffy book that was a nice break from all of that other stuff. And you do see some commentary on different aspects of this time period because a lot of women did not have a lot of rights, and so you're seeing women advocating for themselves at this time. And one of our characters is somebody who wants to get an education. She also wants to advocate for women. And then she crosses paths with a duke who obviously holds a lot of power, and from there, tension. I do think the characters sometimes could be very frustrating. Sometimes I just wanted them to sit down and talk about their feelings. That wasn't always the easiest thing for them to do, though, in that literally at this time it wasn't always seen as appropriate for men and women to be alone in a room together, and they're of different classes as well, and so it was definitely like, anytime they were even seen together and things like that, which definitely built the tension up even more. But at times I would get frustrated with the two of them because I just needed them to talk. But I still thought this was a fun, fluffy read that definitely was exactly what I needed between some of those other books. That's it for my very late full February wrap up. I will have purchase links in the description bar down below if you're interested in checking out any of these books. Like I said, I'll also have my more in-depth video for the new releases. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. Let me know what you read in February. Let me know if you liked or disliked any of the books I mentioned. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you all later.